Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So last week I kind of indicated that I would be talking about the Comic-Con material this week, but at the same time I also said that I would be doing one more video just about heroes. So I can't do both. I think I'll split the difference. And I'm going to talk about heroes, but very much more connected with comics today. In the sense that I want to answer a couple of, I don't know what you'd call them, questions, concerns, statements anyways, made by the comic industry to say that comics have always been political. Comics have always been propaganda. Therefore, they're just being political, like comics have always been. They're just employing a method of propaganda that has always been employed in this way. And I want to answer that in a sort of unique way, because I also get accused of these kinds of things. Every once in a while in my comments, I see someone say either to me or to someone else that I'm just using the same methods as these people who are creating this quote-unquote progressive material. I'm just being political. I'm just using propaganda. I'm just using rhetoric. And therefore, what use is it to listen to me as opposed to them? Because we're both using the same tools. So in exploring that statement and why there is a difference between what I say and what they say, and not just because I'm on one side of the political spectrum and they're on the other, there is a difference. And in looking at why there is a significant difference between myself and them, we will answer all of these questions. And to start looking at this, I'm going to look at something that I usually look at. It's the structure within which each of our arguments are made. Because there is a significant difference between the structure of my argument and the structure of the arguments of these progressive comic makers, even though we can, at times, be employing the same tools. Now, I'm going to make this assertion right at the first, and hopefully give you evidence to prove this to be so, that these people, these progressive people, are simply producing something that is a lie, and they want you to believe a lie. And this is the fundamental basis of the argumentation of all of these progressive people. And I base that upon the statement and the belief, and I would say the truth, when you compare progressivism to reality and see how it doesn't work, you see that progressivism simply is not true. If you take these tenets of this philosophy, or as is more the case, political ideology, and apply it to reality, it simply cannot hold water. And so in order to get people, and certainly massive amounts of people, to believe that this is actually a coherent ideology or philosophy, what they do is they employ lies in order to present their progressive ideology to people. And their lies are couched in argumentation. They say, this is an argument why this is correct. But if you look at these arguments very closely, you'll see that these arguments are fallacious. These are the arguments of sophists. These are arguments that are definitely not set upon reason. They're set upon deception. And one of their biggest tools that they use is equivocation. Now, equivocation is basically taking a word and using different definitions of it throughout your argument in order to take the mind of the hearer and to make them think that they are following a logical and rational train of thought. But basically what they do is they switch up the definition halfway through their argument so that it means something else. And this is one of the things that the progressives have been doing for a long time now. They want to take definitions and give them an entirely new spin. They think that language is a plaything, and they can give their own definitions to everything if they want. I came across a really good example of this a couple of weeks ago when I was going over that Smithsonian information about what is whiteness, and therefore what is racist and evil. And one of the adjoining articles to this talked about how to define things so white people can understand what exactly is going on. And the top of the heap of what they wanted to explain was the statement that went as follows: progress doesn't always move forward. And I read that and said to myself, what? What in the world are you on? Progress, by definition, means moving forward. But of course, here you have progressive people, and they have their own definition of what progress is. And for them, progress does not necessarily mean moving forward. And when I thought about it for a few minutes, I figured out why. Well, it's because over the last 50 years or more, these progressive people have taken the word progress and made it completely equal with change. So they wanted everyone to believe that progress is equal to change and that change is equal to progress. And they did this in order to demonize conservatives, because conservatives don't want to change. Conservatives want to take what actually exists and has worked before and just leave it as it is. And so, if change is equal to progress and these people don't want to change, then obviously these people do not wish to move forward and do not wish to progress. Therefore, the conservatives are the bad people because they don't want to change. Therefore, they don't want to progress. But since then, they've tweaked that definition in the following way. They still kept the definition where progress equals change. And when you look at it and say to yourself, well, yes, change does not always go forward, you'll say, well, that makes sense now. But they twist it around in the following way. They would make you think that, yes, progress can mean moving forward and moving backward. Moving forward is good progress and moving backward is bad progress. But at the same time, even though moving backward is bad progress, it's still head and shoulders above not changing at all, which is what the conservative does, which is in fact evil. And so you see, they play with definitions all the time, and they make them fit their political ideology. And so it is with the argument that comics have always been political. Now, if you look at the word political, in its actual meaning, it comes from the Greek, from the word polis, which means city, which itself comes from a Greek derivative, which means the many. So basically, if you have many different people together, and they have to deal with each other, therefore, you have politics. So it doesn't matter what is going on. By its essential definition, if you have a number of people together and they have to interact, that's politics. Therefore, they are correct that all comics are set upon the political, because all comics have been built in a way where you need multiple people, first of all, to create them, and multiple people to bring them into production, and multiple people to read them, and therefore, with all this multitude of people, that's politics. So you can use politics as that definition and actually be truthful in saying that comics have always been political. But then they switch up the definition halfway through their argument and say, well, since they've always been political, and political means our form of political ideology, that means that comics have always been political in the way that our political ideology dictates. And so you see the equivocation in their argument. Because they switch up the definition of political halfway through, they seek to get you to accept that comics have always been political, and then to accept that the political has always been in their favor, which is not the case. Now, another example of this, and it is a very good and deep example, is the example of propaganda. Now, I say that what you see today in comics is propaganda, but I always clarify that by saying that I'm using the 1940s definition of propaganda, the late 1940s to the present definition of propaganda, which is to teach someone something in a way that gets around their rational mind. And I do that because as a living language, English has taken the word propaganda and since the 1940s has brought it into a sphere that is only negative. And this is the definition of what propaganda is according to the negative that we understand it today. But before that time, there was a positive definition of what propaganda actually was. It could be used in a positive way and in a negative way. Now, the positive definition is very similar to the negative definition, but what is seemingly a subtle change in the definition makes it completely different. Because the old definition of good propaganda is to teach someone something in a way that doesn't necessarily engage their rational mind. Now, there is a giant difference between not necessarily engaging someone's rational mind and circumventing their rational mind. Because again, the propaganda that the progressives put out in their comics and other forms right now is a way that gets around your rational mind. And they have to do that, and they know specifically that they are doing that because they know that rationally their ideology does not hold up. And one of the indicators of this, again, was in some of that Smithsonian material that I went over a couple of weeks ago. They went over whiteness and included a list of what whiteness is and therefore what is racist and evil. And almost at the top of that list was the statement that whiteness included 1. The scientific method, 2. Objective rational thought, and 3. The ideas of cause and effect, which is basically logic. This, by the way, is also something that Ta-Nehisi Coates, the current writer of Captain America, also talked about in one of the recent interviews that I covered with him. He talked about the fact that it's okay to use science, but not to set it up on a pedestal. And the basic shorthand of what he was trying to say was the fact that, sure, if I need to go to the hospital and get something repaired so that I can continue living, then I'm going to do that and I'm going to employ science in that way. But as soon as it steps in front of my political ideology and says that my political ideology is wrong, then I'm going to discard it. Which, unfortunately for him and all the rest of the progressives, you simply cannot do that. If you take your political ideology and make it trump science whenever you want, that science is no longer going to be useful pretty soon. Just ask some of the former residents of the USSR who had to endure the state telling them that they had to plant their crops in a socialist way according to socialist ideology, and that's the only way that they could farm. And what happened? Well, massive amounts of people starved and died. But anyway, so you see the progressives today, they're trying to completely destroy any appeal to rational thought. Why? Because they know full well that if you apply rational thought to their ideology, it will fall apart. And so, in knowing this, they need to construct their argument in a way that purposefully shuts off your rational mind. And so, teaches you the lie that their ideology can exist within reality and be a good thing. And again, just briefly, this is one of the major reasons why, if you actually employ your rational mind and complain that they're not following any kind of canon or not following any kind of continuity within the story itself, well, they tell you to go away. They say, these comics are not for you. This is not for you. Go away. Why? Because you're not blindly accepting what they have laid out for you. You're actually employing your rational mind, and they cannot have that. But let's look at the good definition of propaganda for a minute. Because I'm sure some of you may still be shaking your head and saying, no, there's no such thing as good propaganda. But the old idea of good propaganda was the fact that what you were trying to do when you presented an argument that didn't necessarily engage the rational mind of the person, well, ideally, it should, and I stress that word, should work in the following way. You will be presenting an argument to an individual or group of individuals that is indeed rationally true, and you know it to be rationally true. But you're looking at these individuals and you know that this specific group of individuals cannot understand rationally what you have to say, or cannot understand fully rationally what you have to say, and therefore you have to teach them what you deem to be rationally true, that is, in accord with reality, in a way that doesn't necessarily engage their rational mind. But it doesn't shut their rational mind down either, so if they wish to ask rational questions, or they have the ability to ask rational questions, they can do so, and therefore find out what the rational reason behind what you are teaching actually is. And the best example of this is children. If we look at children, the way, certainly in the West anyways, that we look at children is that children do not have a fully formed reason. This is why we put limits on children. And by the way, just briefly, this is one of the reasons why the progressives want to get rid of all limitations on young people altogether. There was even statements in some of the comic material that I covered last year where they said, no, you can't call them young people or children anymore. That's demeaning. Therefore, we have to erase all difference between children and adults. But anyway, I'm just going to leave that be. When you look at the way that traditionally in Western society we deal with children, it is looking at a child as someone who doesn't have a fully formed reason. And we set up rules according to this. This is why children cannot drive, or drink, or get married. This is why we set age limits to those things. And by the way, this is also one of the major reasons why our school systems are set up in the way that they are. The children get out of the school system at the time when we deem them to be able to fully understand things according to reason. So the point is that you have children. They don't have a fully formed reason. Therefore, it is okay to use propaganda on little children to teach them something that is rationally true. But at the same time, you don't want to shut down their reason. You just want to teach them so that they understand it. And once they start to grow up and their reason starts to form more and more, then they can start themselves asking the questions according to their reason and then be able to understand and discover why, according to reason, this thing is true. I mean, just look at a 4-year-old. You have to tell them not to go play out in the middle of the street. They don't understand why they can't go out and play in the middle of the street. It's a nice flat surface. No one's out there. My ball bounces really good on that flat surface. Why can't I go out and play in the middle of the street? Well, you don't sit there and give them reason after reason after reason of why they can't do that. Most 3 or 4-year-olds simply cannot understand that. If they can, great. But most of the time you just got to say, no, I'm saying no, and you'll use some argument from authority that they simply cannot do this. Why? Because rationally they can't understand exactly why they shouldn't do that. But after they develop their reason, they will begin to understand why. And so it is with a lot of things that we teach children, especially little children. We teach them in a propaganda way. We teach them according to a method, a good propaganda method. That is to say, I'm teaching you this not according to reason, but usually according to authority. But when your reason develops enough, you can ask the questions and then find out why this is rationally true and in accord with reality. But if we look outside of this idea of children, if we look at another group and see where good propaganda used to be used, well, it was used upon big audiences. And of course, if you have big audiences and everybody's trying to understand one thing and they're interacting with each other, what is that? Well, according to the old definition, that's politics. Now, your politics could be straight up politics that we understand today, or it could be something like a story. So if you have your audience, you have a mass number of people, and not everybody's reason can work in the same way in that audience. You have people who have very low reason capabilities, and you have some who are very high in their reason capabilities. But you want to reach as many people as possible. So what do? Well, you use the good form of propaganda. Why? Because the people who have a low form of reason can understand it, and the people who have a high form of reason may be a little bit bored by it, but they can also understand it, and they can go on to ask the questions of why this is rationally true. And so to answer the accusation that is levied at me sometimes, saying, I'm just using propaganda the same as them, well, yes, I am. But I'm using good propaganda. That is to say, propaganda as it used to be prior to the 1940s, like 100 years ago. Why? Because there was a good form. Why? Because I'm dealing politically, yes I am, with a mass number of people, and I'm hoping that people can understand what I have to say. But in order to do so, I know that not everybody has the same capability of reason. And no, that's not me looking down at my audience. I have had people in my comments again and again say, please, will you just dumb it down a little bit? And besides that, I myself am one of those people. I myself wish that I could lay out for you, just proposition by proposition, this logical, rational argument, and that was it. I probably wouldn't get as many people listening to me then, but I would love to be able to do so, or at the very least be able to do so and then present my rhetorical argument according to these logical propositions. But some logic still eludes me. Some things like probable propositions, and whether or not you necessarily need an example to exist within reality for a probable proposition to be considered true, I don't know. I really wish I did. I need to learn more. Now, I'm sure some people are saying to themselves, what in the world are you talking about? And some people are saying to themselves, what? You don't understand that yet? Which is exactly what my point is. And since I want to appeal to as many people as possible who listen to my videos, yes, I'm going to use rhetoric. I'm going to give rhetorical arguments. That's what I do. And again, it's not just because of my audience, it's because of me as well. And one thing to be noted here is the fact that all that I've been talking about is dependent upon reason, and that everybody is rational. And this is something completely foreign to your progressive ideology. Again, with that definition of what is whiteness, and right up there at the top being objective rational thinking, they don't even believe that rational thought is ingrained within human beings. They think it is something oppressive, racist, and evil. But if you look at the way that human nature has been defined for most of human history, up until about, 60, 70, 80 years ago, it was that man is a rational animal, or a rational creature. That is to say that reason was the fundamental principle of what being human is. But it should be noted that people, like children, who cannot fully use their reason and fully comprehend things according to reason, they're no less human than adults. People like idiots, and I mean that in the actual definition of the word, someone who has the mental capability of a 3-year-old or less, these people can't use their reason very well, but they're still human beings. They're still full human beings. The point being that reason is fundamentally a part of the nature of human beings, but it is also dependent upon that idea of human nature that I have talked about over and over again, that human beings are fundamentally broken. This is in the background of the definition. And I think the best way to look at it is this. If you take everything wrong with a human being and you exclude it, and you get a perfect human being, if you get a Steve Rogers, and he is not just a perfect physical human being, but a perfect human being in every way, and all the limitations and brokenness that was ingrained within him is taken away. Well, when you get that human being, that human being can't fly. Why? Because even though you take away all his limitations, it's not within his nature to fly, and therefore taking away those limitations still does not give him the ability to fly. But if you take away all of those limitations, he will be completely rational. Completely and absolutely rational. Why? Because it is within the nature of every human being to be rational. And the only thing inhibiting that rationality is our brokenness, and this is why we strive to learn. This is why we strive to grow, because we want to overcome that brokenness and become whole. And so, to answer my detractors who say that you're just being political, you're just using propaganda, you're just using rhetoric, the same as the people on the other side are doing, therefore I shouldn't listen to you any more than I should listen to them, I would say, yes, you should listen to me more than you should listen to them. Why? Because they are using these tools in a way that circumvents your rational mind, because they deliberately know that they are lying to you and wish to deceive you. I, at the very least, believe that what I am telling you is true. I would say that if you take logic and reason and apply it to reality, it is actually shown to be true. But at the very least, you can say that I believe this to be true. I am not deliberately deceiving you. What I am telling you, I believe, is according to reality and has a rational basis within reality, and you can go out and see it according to reality. And this brings me to another reason why you should listen to someone who is rationally using these tools rather than the progressives who are using these same tools. It's because, well, some of the work when using something like good propaganda, some of that work is on the audience. Now, some people may see that as a bad thing, as if you're shifting the burden of proof onto the audience. But it's actually a good thing, because if you look at the progressives and the way they present you an argument, you're not allowed to detract or move away from that argument and exactly what they want to mean by that argument. There is no inclusion of your own thought into any of this. You must accept it as they present it wholeheartedly, or you are wrong. And if any of you have been on the comic side of Twitter, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Even if you have something as simple as a question for these creators and how their progressive ideology works into the story, you are automatically attacked, called a racist, or a thisophobe, or a thatophobe, and then you're blocked, because you cannot be allowed to participate within the discussion. You can only accept it wholeheartedly or be attacked and then discard it. But within the old system of what people might call good propaganda, well, you allow your audience some input into what is going on. Because, of course, as I said, you present them with an argument that doesn't necessarily engage their rational mind. But it can. The only thing is that it only can if that person is willing to put in the work to rationally ask the questions and seek the answers that they are looking for. So it respects your free choice and respects your reason, and it respects your capability to use those things. Or to put all of that into one statement, what these progressives are using these tools for is deception. But what rational people are using these tools for is understanding according to reality. And this brings me to the idea of hero once again. Because within my last video, I had an interesting question, which questioned some of the basis of what I always have to say. And the question was this: you always talk about how a person can become a hero, but you never actually answer the question why I should become a hero. And looking at the answer to that question just sets up a very good dichotomy of the difference between why you should not listen to the progressives and why you should listen to someone who bases their ideas upon rational understandings of reality. If you look at the way each of these sides presents a hero, the progressive people are using argumentation in a story, which is a rhetorical argument. They're using it in a sophistic way, that is to say, they're being sophists, and so they're not actually presenting good reason. It is reason that is meant to deceive you in order to disengage your rational mind, to use this idea of a hero to teach you that their ideas and progressive ideology is the noble way to actually live. But of course, as I stated before, if you take their ideology and actually apply it to reality according to how reality works, that is to say, through the use of reason, you will see that it falls apart. And no, their heroes are not noble in any way. And you, if you actually want to become a hero in that vein, is not noble in any way. But if you take the definition of hero that I'm always talking about, that a hero is a paragon of virtue, and those virtues are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and you need to instill those within your life through habit and then become a paragon of these virtues in order to be a hero. If you take all of that and apply it to reality and then apply it to your life, you will see massive benefits in several different ways. Why? Because the traditional idea of a hero, again, is in accord with reality. That's exactly the basis of the beginning of being a hero and these virtues. Right reason is understanding things according to reality. And right reason leads into prudence, which is making decisions according to reality and your right reason. And so to answer the question point blank, why should I become a hero? Well, again, there are several reasons. The first reason would be simply that it is right. And I define right by, again, that it is in accord with reality. What is right. And since all of this is in accord with reality, then it is, therefore, right. And I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people who I would rather be right than happy any day. This is why I will suffer for what I think to be right. Some people won't do that, but I certainly will. So, first of all, why should you be a hero? 1, because it is right. That is to say, in accord with reality. But there is a second reason, if you want another reason, and that reason is that we, as human beings, were built with a nature that is supposed to be heroic. That is to say, that when you become heroic in this fashion and live in a virtuous way, you become fulfilled. And not fulfilled in a small way like I just ate a good meal and I'm full. No, this is fulfilled in a fundamental way where you feel whole. Because, of course, this is one of the definitions of virtue itself. Virtue is the ability to allow you to accomplish your ends. And your ends are set by your human nature. And so if you become virtuous, you fulfill those ends. That is exactly what virtue is supposed to do. So if you become a hero, which is a paragon of virtue, then you automatically have the power to fulfill the ends of your human nature, and therefore you become fulfilled and whole. And of course, this will also mean happy. So that's the second reason why you should be a hero. But there is even a third reason. And this third reason is because when you act in this way, you are, again, acting in accord with reality. That's what right reason and prudence, the first two principles of becoming a hero, actually are for. And so when you do things, they will work out for you. That is to say, you will get much more utility out of all of your choices, because if they are prudent, they will constantly work for you and work out in your favor. And I have to say, I have seen this in my own life. I'm not saying this to brag in any way. I just want to use it as an example. But for my own life, I have looked for a long time at the rules around me, and I have separated the ones that are actually according to what is reality and the ones that are simply social norms that people have adopted and are not connected with reality. And I have taken those social norms and I have thrown them out the window. And I said to myself, I'm going to act in these ways according to reality. And you know what? It has made my choices so fulfilling and made them bear fruit in so many ways that I could not even have imagined this when I made the choices to begin with. And this has frustrated some people around me to no end. Even my friends. They look at me and they say, why? Why in the world do things work out for you the way that they do constantly when you don't follow the rules? Well, it's because I'm not following the rules of society, which are based upon nothing or based upon false assertions or false argumentation. No, I'm basing my choices upon a prudent decision that is in accord with reality. And thinking about all of these three reasons reminds me of, who was it? I think it was Aristotle, or maybe it was Aquinas, who talked about if you were to lose your sight, you would long for it back, not just because of the usefulness that it had for you, but also because it was a good in itself. You miss vision, you miss sight when you are blind, because it is a good in itself. It is not just because of its utility, but because it is enjoyable and good. And so it is with being a hero. There is that first level of utility. When you act in accord with reality as a paragon of virtue, things simply work out for you. That is the bottom level of why you should be a hero. The next level up is because it makes you fulfilled. It makes you happy. It takes your human nature and gives you the ability to correct it and fulfill what your ends are as human beings. But even on top of all of that, there is simply the understanding that what you are doing is right. That is to say, in accord with reality. And this is what a hero should embody. This is the hero that we should be seeing within our comic books, or within our movies or television shows, or anything else, within a rhetorical argument that is given to you as entertainment, so that you can see these paragons of virtue, so that you yourself can become such. And I think Plato actually described it much better than I can, so I'm going to let Plato have the last word. And I'm going to give you a quote from, if memory serves, I think it's the 5th book of Plato's Laws, where he's finishing up the prologue to his laws. He's talking about virtue, and in a roundabout way, he's talking about heroes, because the next thing he talks about is that if we take all these laws and implement them within a society and live according to this rational way of living according to reality, what do we got to look at? Well, we got to look at our mythology, and we got to correct it, and we got to take out all of these stories about these super beings that aren't actually in accord with reality. But of course, what do you see today? You see the exact opposite happening in companies like Marvel. They have stated this specifically. They have stated that they wanted to jettison all of the old ways of storytelling. That is to say, this Aristotelian way of storytelling that is based upon reason. They specifically revamped their entire company to get rid of that form of storytelling. And what do they wish to use storytelling for? Well, as Vice President said, it wants to take these heroes, this modern mythology for America, and use it in a psychological way in order to push progressive ideas. Which again, is the exact opposite of what we have been building up for almost 3,000 years now in Western civilization. But as I said, I want Plato to have the last word. Right before he's talking about correcting these stories of these superpowered individuals so that they are in accord with reason, he talks about why a person should want to be a hero to begin with. And he says the following: "The life that we have judged the more pleasant is not that in which pleasure is exceeded by pain, but in which pain is exceeded by pleasure. And since the temperate life has its feelings fewer, smaller, and lighter than the licentious life, and the wise life than the foolish, and the brave life than the cowardly, and since the one set of lies ranks as more pleasant than the other, The temperate, brave, wise, and healthy lives are more pleasant than the foolish, licentious, cowardly, and the diseased. To sum up, the life of bodily and spiritual virtue, as compared with that of vice, is not only more pleasant, but also exceeds greatly in nobility, rectitude, virtue, and good fame, so that it causes the man who lives it to live ever so much more happily than him who lives the opposite life. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.